Hi, everybody. We'll kick things off in about 2 minutes here. Welcome, everybody, to the fourth session of the USACE Sustainable Project Delivery Series. My name is Andy Temeyer. I'm an architect and project manager in Omaha District. And today we'll be discussing sustainable sites. We have Mr. Jason Hummel with us today. He's going to be the main presenter. Jason is a licensed engineer and resident engineer with the Army Corps of Engineers Baltimore District. He has been with the Baltimore District for 12 years. He's a graduate of Penn State University with a degree in architectural engineering. He's a lead AP, and he resides in Laurel, Maryland. He's working on the East Campus IPO at Fort Meade, and his current projects include the East Campus Building 2 and East Campus Building 3. Before he kicks things off, just a few little administrative items I wanted to run through. If you can, please keep your microphones on mute as long as you possibly can. We may have some time for open discussion at the end of the presentation, but just make sure we don't have any distractions during the bulk of the presentation. I did include a message to everybody in the chat. If you have any questions, feel free to type those in at any time, and I'll do my best to work with Jason to work those into the conversation throughout the presentation. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jason, and he can dive into our content today.
All right, thanks, Andy. Appreciate that. Wanted to let everybody know I'm presenting today from very, very rainy Maryland. So we had just had the hurricane storm kind of come through last night, and it still is blaring down on us today, and I just got a tornado warning on my phone. So if for some reason I stop presenting all of a sudden, you'll know why. Hopefully we don't have any issues. Anyway, I wanted to get into our objective for today's webinar presentation on sustainable sites. So the objective is to describe the process for designing and constructing a sustainable site. The resources for today are ones, if you've been on our webinars in past weeks, a lot of these will look very familiar. Our UFC 1-200-02, which is our HPSB requirements, our high performance sustainable building requirements, are the basis for our presentation today, and most of the content you'll see comes out of that. But you also see some of these other resources kind of mixed in there as well. I did want to draw people's attention to the Corps of Engineers Sustainability MS Teams site. If you are not currently linked to that in MS Teams, I'd encourage you to go to that and get connected to that team site. There's some resources there. The presentations for these webinars get posted there, with also recordings of the webinar. So a lot of resources that you can utilize. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that one. So today we're going to be discussing two main things: selecting a sustainable site, and then some site development strategies as we design our site. What are some strategies from a sustainability standpoint that we can utilize? But those are the two main areas of discussion for today. And this presentation was originally like an hour-and-a-half presentation that I'm trying to compress down into about 55 minutes. So we will try to keep moving as quickly as we can. So from USC 1-200-02, Chapter 2 is where we are going to get our content for today's webinar. Section 2-3 is about promoting sustainable location and site development. And there's 4 main areas that we are going to go through. Site selection, mitigating heat island effect, reducing light pollution, and then stormwater management. So we'll go through each of those areas separately, and we'll show just different strategies that we can employ under each of those parts of the USC. So the first one is site selection, 2-3.1. And some of you, as we go through this presentation, you're going to notice some references also to the International Green Construction Code. And those are different than what you might have seen in the past. You're going to see where the International Green Construction Code has adopted a lot of what was previously ASHRAE 189.1 into it. And so you'll see some of those references. But for right now, looking at site selection, our site selection criteria in the UFC, we not only have to meet the requirements of UFC 2-100-01, which is our installation master planning, but we also have to meet the requirements of UFC 3-101-01, which is our architecture UFC. And so we have some preferred characteristics, specifically in those 2 UFCs, that we need to take into consideration when we're looking at site selection. Adaptive reuse, which is using a previously developed site, our building orientation, location, transit, pedestrians, and the access to different things, avoiding sensitive land, and also parking considerations. And as we go through this presentation, if you notice at the bottom of this slide, it says anything that's bold is a specific preference that's mentioned in the ASA SDB policy. So just so you know, if you see something that's bold, that's what that is. So when we think of a sustainable site, there's a lot of different things that can come to mind. And what makes a sustainable site? If we look at the 2 pictures on this slide, we would say, all right, is the left one a sustainable site? Is the right one a sustainable site? And just to look at a site, you might not know the answer to that question. Because one of the things that really plays into whether or not a site is sustainable or not is what kind of project or what kind of building are we trying to put in that location. So, for example, if you were trying to put an industrial warehouse on either of these 2 sites, it might not be what would be considered a great sustainable site for that type of facility. So we have to always think about what type of building are we trying to put on a site. That will help us to know whether or not that site is sustainable for that type of facility. Another thing that we're going to do today, as we're going through the UFC, is we are going to do a little bit of a cross-reference to LEED-related credits when it comes to each of the areas that we'll talk about in the UFC. And I do want to make sure that we know that what's in the UFC, that is our governing criteria, governing requirement. But since the Army uses LEED as our third-party certifier for the most part, we'll also reference to that. But the real backbone is the UFC requirement, and depending on what third-party certifying group you use for certifying sustainability in your project, this might be a little bit different for you. But we'll be looking at some of the LEED requirements as well today. So in regards to site selection, the LEED requirements for site selection when we go through that section of LEED are when it comes to neighborhood development location, there's possible 16 points of credits that we can get for that. And according to LEED, we want to avoid development of inappropriate sites. We want to enhance livability. We also want to have protection of sensitive land. We want to avoid land that is environmentally sensitive. And that could be examples such as prime farmland, floodplains, endangered species habitat, bodies of water, or wetlands. There's also 2 points that could be achieved for site selection for what's called a high priority site. And those are sites that promote the health of the surrounding area. And some of the places that we can find those high priority sites are the EPA National Priorities List. There's also a Federal Empowerment Zone Site list, Federal Enterprise Community Sites, Federal Renewable Community Sites, and then the Department of the Treasury and Department of Housing and Urban Development also have lists of priority sites that can qualify for these points. Two more areas for site selection that LEED considers for credits are surrounding density and diverse uses. Some diverse uses could be encouraging areas to have diverse uses for such things as food retail, community serving retail, services, civic and community facilities, other diverse uses such as that. For another 5 possible points in LEED, we can have access to quality transit. And so the intent of that is to encourage development in areas with existing transportation choices already in place. And the criteria in LEED are that we want to have a site that's within a quarter mile of bus, streetcar, or informal transit stops, or we want to be within a half a mile of bus, rapid transit, light or heavy rail, commuter rail, or a ferry train. So besides site selection, LEED also has credits related to site design. And some of the items that we can incorporate into our site design are things such as bicycle facilities, reducing our parking footprint, and locations for green vehicles, ones that use alternative fuel sources. And so for the bike requirements, if you're not familiar with LEED, we want our bike facilities to be within 200 yards of a bike network, to have short-term bike storage within 100 feet of our main entrance, long-term bike storage within 100 feet of a functional entry, and we want additional storage and shower requirements for the facility as well. For the reduced parking footprint, we don't want to exceed the minimum local code for parking capacity, but we also want to provide a percentage reduction below the recommendations of the Parking Consultants Council. For green vehicles, we want to designate a minimum of 5% parking spaces for green vehicles, and we want to install electric vehicle charging in 2% of those spaces, or have liquid gas or battery facilities in 2% of spaces. A couple more credits related to LEED for site design. For site development, we want to protect and restore habitat. That's worth 2 points potentially. And what we're doing there is we're going to promote biodiversity, and we want to try to restore 30% of the site identified as previously disturbed. Or we can also donate 40 cents per square foot for total site to land trust or conservation organizations in the region. Another credit for 1 point is related to open space. And so with open space, we're encouraging interaction with the environment. We can do that by providing outdoor space that's greater than or equal to 30% of the total site, or a minimum of 25% of the site must be vegetated. So for when you look at LEED for location and transportation and sustainable site credits, we have a possible of 26 possible points for how we locate our site and some of the design features that we can add to our site out of 110 potential LEED credits. And when we break those down, those 26 possible points, 14 are impacted by our initial site selection. So that's where we get one of those Those factors are initial site selection can impact 14 of those credits, and then 12, we have design features that we can add into our site that may influence those credits as well.
So, Jason, just to kind of build on that, that's a topic that's come up quite a bit, I guess, in my circles, is how difficult it is to achieve some of those site side credits when the site selection has already occurred. So I guess, that's a difficult and nuanced conversation that happens at the project level. But ultimately, that's why it's so important to find a way to be engaged in the planning SREP process and to consider these items. A couple weeks ago, we talked about planning and programming. That's why it's so important to initiate those conversations as early as you possibly can, so that you so the project's set up for success. And then, even if some of those decisions have been made, there's still points that can be directly influenced by design. And so I guess maybe the point there is find the points for success where you have influence in the time that you have for the respective project.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Yeah, we will. So the very end of this presentation actually has some contributions in the master planning phase of projects and or the installation. And really, there are some aspects where it absolutely has to be planned for at that stage, and a lot of our ability to have influence or flexibility in any of these areas is really affected at that stage. So we'll address those toward the end of the presentation. But thank you. That's a very good point. We will hit on that. All right. So focusing back to our UFC 1-200-02, our next section that we're going to look at is mitigating heat island effect. That's 2-3.2. And so for those of you who are unfamiliar with heat island, and I just want to make sure that I'm not being presumptuous, that everyone knows what that is. Heat island is the tendency of urban areas to be warmer in temperature than their surroundings. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but typically urban areas have less green space than open farmland or non-urban areas. So there's a tendency for them to have a higher temperature. So we're trying to minimize that through our site design. And there's a couple of different strategies that the International Green Council, Green Construction Code, has identified as ways to mitigate the heat island effect. And the first is through our hardscapes. And hardscapes are landscape features that are impervious or less pervious than just open land. So what they've dictated is that 50% of site hardscapes should have existing or new trees to provide shade on them. So if we're going to have hardscape, we want to have them, at least 50% of them, be able to be shaded by trees that are either existing or new. If we use paving, we want to have a solar reflective index of 29, a minimum or greater. We want to use open grid pavers whenever we can. Shade from structures can also be a way to shade some of that hardscape. And we have an exception for hardscapes in climate zones 6, 7, and 8. And if anybody's wondering what climate zones are covered by 6, 7, and 8, we are talking about mostly northern continental United States, so like areas like Montana, North and South Dakota. Alaska is covered in that climate zone as well, are those kinds of events. So we do have some exceptions in areas where we don't get as much direct sunlight. One of the other ways that we can mitigate heat island effect is through walls. And so if we're talking about the requirement for shading of walls, we want to shade 30% of our east and west above grade walls up to 20 feet. And 75% of opaque wall surfaces on the east and the west should have materials that have an SRI, solar reflective index, of 29 or greater. And once again, we have some exceptions in areas where we don't get as much direct sunlight. So some of those climate zones 5, 6, 7, and 8 for the east wall, also climate zones 7 and 8 for the west wall. Shading is not required. For roofs, the International Green Construction Code talks about trying to achieve specified SRI, solar reflective index, for roofs, and that depends on whether or not our roof is a flat roof or a steep slope roof. So for flat roofs, we want to have an SRI of 78 as a minimum. And so if you know SRI, the higher you go, the more reflective that surface is. So for a low sloped roof, we want more reflective surface. If it's a steep slope roof, then we need an SRI of 29 for a minimum. So just a couple of pictures of some of these strategies for reducing heat island effect. The hardscape strategies that we can use are to include, we have planter boxes, things like that, where we're going to have hardscape, have some relief by having trees planted for shade. We can use reflective paving. If you look at the picture here on the left, sorry, it's a little bit fuzzy, but some of the pavers that are used there are really light, so they have a higher reflective index. And then we can also use an open grid paver system where we might have some kind of pervious material, whether it's grass or some kind of other pervious material inside of that paver to make it not quite as just total hardscape and have open grid. So some of the roof strategies, like I said, depending on what type of roof we have, will dictate what SRI we need to achieve. So this is a steep slope roof, and when we're talking about steep slope roof, we're talking about ones that are more than a 2 to 12 pitch on our roof. So in that case, so like for this one, this would be considered a steep slope roof. This would require a SRI of 29 in the minimum, but if it was a flat roof, then we would need a SRI of 78. Which is why if you've ever been on a flat roof, most of them are made of some kind of a really light white material, and whereas if you had that on a roof like this, you would get a lot of reflection to the surrounding areas, which is probably why they don't require quite as much or as high of an SRI on steep slope roof, just to reduce the glare on those who are around it. Pivoting back to LEED and related credits when it comes to heat island reduction. So the requirements for heat island reduction, we have a possible 2 points, and we can achieve either 1 or 2 of those points by either we meet an equation for percent of hardscape with shade or reflectance, we can get 2 points. Or if we place 75% of our parking under cover, under some sort of cover that's reflective, vegetated, or used to generate energy, we can get 1 of those 2 points. Going back to the UFC, the next section under UFC 1-200-02, Chapter 2, is reduction of light pollution. Can anybody guess what this is a picture of? I know you're not supposed to turn on your mics, but I just want to give you a fun little picture here. You can type it in the chat if you want to see if you're correct. I won't tell you just quite yet, but
they're all over it.
They're all over it. What are they?
Yep,
what are they typing? I'm not. What is that?
Florida.
It is. It's the outline of Florida. If you look, you can see kind of down in the lower right of the picture, you have the Miami and up to the coast, Fort Lauderdale on the left side of the coast. You have Tampa Bay, Orlando. But yeah, this is a night view from the International Space Station of the coastline of Florida, and then continuing up the coastline of the United States. But it's a good example of when you look at areas of high lighting density, just how much you can have as far as light pollution. And what light pollution does is it takes away the ability to enjoy the night sky quite as much. If any of you have ever been in a city situation or in a city location and tried to pick out stars or look up at the night sky, it's definitely not quite as enjoyable of an experience as if you are on a mountaintop in the middle of nowhere and can look up and see stars as many as you can imagine. And so what we're trying to do with light pollution is to enhance that experience of the night sky and have it not be hindered by things such as overlighting and non-directed lighting. So what we need to do under the UFC is it actually calls us to follow UFC 3-530-01, which is for interior and exterior lighting and controls. And under that UFC, there's a couple of different sections. We have the requirement to reduce light trespass. And so there's language in there for our selection and location of lighting equipment. We're also called to minimize light pollution through using shielded luminaires for area and roadway lighting. And then specifically when it comes to using shielded luminaires for area lighting, when we're using unshielded luminaires such as wall packs or decorative luminaires, we need to use them at low mounting heights, reduce their brightness down to about 4,200 lumens, which is about 55 watts if you're thinking in that sense. And so that UFC has put in place requirements for how we control and how we direct lighting. In our International Green Construction Code, we have a couple of different tables that give us the rating requirements for exterior fixtures. And so these tables govern backlighting, uplighting, glare. If you aren't familiar with these tables, the LZ0 and LZ1, so those are outdoor lighting zones. So an LZ0 is an area that really should be no ambient light. So we're talking about open space and areas that really should have no added light other than what is there naturally. Going all the way up to lighting zone 4, which is a location that would need high ambient light because there's either safety or security requirements. So those are just to give you a little sense of what those tables are all about. And then we have the light ratings for backlighting, uplighting, and glare that are prescribed for each of those outdoor light zones. Like I said, the three main design considerations when we're talking about light pollution are glare, overlighting, and uniformity. So glare, obviously, I think everybody's pretty familiar with glare. It's not having our lights positioned in such a way or in a location where it's causing stress on people's views. Overlighting is having that lighting directed in such a way that it is applicable for the task that it's intended for, and it doesn't cast light into areas and views where it's not supposed to. And then uniformity, which is really so that we have continuous and typical amount of light, so we're not casting large amounts of foot candles in one place and then having it go back and forth and vary. So what you'll see on this slide and the next one are just two examples of lighting intensity. And so what you see is this is one for a building site. The next one you'll see is for a roadway intersection. So obviously along our building site, we have our lighting in certain locations, and the lighting intensity is brightest there. And then our hope or the intent of limiting light pollution is that it's intense in the locations where it needs to be. And then as we get away from the areas where it's needed, we want it to drop off dramatically so that it's not overlighting locations where we don't need that same level of focus. So here we kind of see we have our building here. So we have lighting that goes around the perimeter of the building. We have lighting in our parking lot and along our entrance ways to the facility. We're looking at a roadway intersection such as this picture. We have lighting intensity leading up to the intersection, and then as we get a certain distance away, we want that to drop off so our intersections aren't casting light out farther than for those traffic interchanges. I'm not sure how well you can see the picture on the left. This was an example of a place where a light design was done to correct a previously inefficient situation. This is at Ken Palm Spillway in the Mobile District. And these upgrades were accomplished by an energy savings performance contractor. So on the left, if you can see it, there were kind of these high mass lights that were really inefficient when it comes to broadcast of foot candles, and they were kind of more just broadcasted to a general area, not really directed very well, and so a lot of light pollution based upon that type of fixture that was selected. But on the right side of the page is after the redesign was done, after the new fixtures were put into place, we had a much more efficient LED fixture that was directed exactly to the location where the lighting was needed for operations, and you didn't have a lot of overlighting of the surrounding area. So much more efficient and a much better use of light fixtures. So pivoting back to LEED, when it comes to light pollution reduction, LEED does have a possible 1 point or 1 credit for light pollution reduction, and the intent of this credit is that we want to increase night sky access. The requirements from LEED are meeting those ratings for the luminaire uplight ratings, not exceeding the backlight or glare ratings, and then for signage in particular, we don't want to exceed the luminance limitations. So when we're thinking about sustainable measures when it comes to sites, one of the concepts that we talk about sometimes is scope of influence. And when we talk about that, what we mean is when it comes to sustainable measures on our projects, is that can a sustainable measure really be accomplished when you think about a single discipline on a job? You know, so if we had a job where only the mechanical equipment was designed for sustainability, could we really say that job was sustainable? Or if we had an installation where only a single building on the installation was designed for sustainability, could we call that installation sustainable? Or a single site where, on a campus, if only one entity was acting with sustainability, could we call that sustainable? And I don't know. When you look at all the questions on this page, what is the scope of influence that's needed for sustainability? And I think what we start to realize is that with sustainability measures, for them to really endure and be truly sustainable, we need broader master planning involvement. We need kind of buy-in from all parties, because without it, we'll never be able to maintain the initial momentum for sustainability that's achieved by that single building or that neighborhood within a larger development area, or that one discipline. We need all-in buy-in from all entities. And so what we're going to look at now is just to take this idea of sustainable sites and look at what the USC also says about master planning and its involvement in sustainable sites. So for sustainable installations, USC 1-200-02, Chapter 6 says this. It says projects are not standalone initiatives, but are part of a comprehensive sustainable installation master plan that defines the holistic vision for planning and development on the installation. And what we start to realize is that the value of planning is to look beyond that individual project and try to create synergies within the larger area or the larger campus or the larger neighborhood or the entire installation, and establish a vision or a goal for sustainability. And master planning plays a huge role in that process. Chapter 2 of USC 2-100-01 says sustainable planning leads to lasting development that involves meeting our present mission requirements without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And I think that one, for me personally, is one that I take pride in when I think of my contributions to sustainability. I have the ability to influence as we are going ahead and trying to meet mission requirements for our customers. Is to say, okay, we can do this, but how can we do it in such a way that this installation, this location, this site is going to not affect or not compromise the future of what's around it. It's going to enhance the value, enhance the quality of life for those that interact with it. So looking at master planning, or looking at planning in general, we came up with 10 key principles of sustainable planning when it relates to how we select sites, how we integrate a new project or new site into the overall design for our installation, our campus, whatever you happen to be working on. And some of these 10 key principles are maybe a little more applicable to the type of scenario that we see with military construction. Some of them aren't as much, and so what I'll try and do is spend a little more time on the ones that I feel like are a little more applicable, and still hit on the ones that aren't as much, but we can, if you have any questions about them at the end, we can talk about some of the ones that we might not hit on quite as much. So the first key principle is compact development. And you wouldn't always know this because some installations have land for miles and miles and miles, but installations really do need to conserve their land resources. Land is a commodity that we can't get more unless you are in certain countries where they try and build islands. But we are not one of those here in the United States. We have a limited amount of land, and so we have to conserve our land resources. And whether that's installations looking at how their current installation is configured and reconfiguring current land use patterns or transportation systems within their developed areas to create opportunities for future development, that might be a way that we need to adjust that way of thinking. It's not to say we've got a lot of land, we're just going to sprawl out bigger, wider, more horizontal. We might need to start looking at more compact development patterns, whether that's multi-story buildings, greater residential densities, mixed uses, minimal space between buildings while still maintaining our ATFP requirements, or other constraints. We have to get creative in that sense. But compact development should be one of our key principles when it comes to master for our sites. Infill development. So infill development is where we plan development within our installation for. And so, like I said, not sprawling out farther and farther and farther to the extremities, but forming an installation core and using previously developed land when possible. What it does is typically, as we get out from that installation core, we're probably going to look at using more green space. So if we can avoid doing that, we can stay away from that green space and let it in its current state. And what that might require for installation planning and development is to remove or replace aging or low density development with higher density development when needed. So this is one that, when I look at it for military installations in particular, this one might not be as applicable because we can't always control the location of our military installations. And some of them are in locations where they're not right next to a major transportation hub. So when we talk about transit-oriented development, this is a key principle, and when it's available, we want to try to place our development around transit corridors and places where it's readily accessible, but it's not always an option for all localities.
So, Jason, this is one item that ultimately varies a lot from installation to installation, but it can be applied at various scales. I guess maybe the point would be that even if it's a minor victory, placing a facility on a site that's got better access to transportation, whether that's public transportation or just established transportation corridors and things like that, may be a victory rather than placing it on a new greenfield, which, I don't know, speaking from my experience, seems to be the more common trend on new MILCON type projects.
You know that you can use the shuttle option where if you have a shuttle that goes from a main point to the base, you can still achieve the transportation credits.
Right, and that can vary, depending on which third-party certification tool you're using and things like that. But you're right that a lot of times it's not even something that's considered. It's just discounted as we can't get that. So I think Jason and I were talking when we were running through these slides. Ultimately, those conditions change a lot. You may go from one project where it's not viable to the next project, which isn't that far away, where it's totally a viable option to document for compliance. So you just have to, dig in a little bit and investigate, and also keep tabs on what the base is doing for those types of alternatives.
Yeah, and especially when you're doing like a campus type of. So right now I'm working on the NSA East Campus expansion, And as we've gone through the campus development, you have to always have your ear to the ground when it comes to transit development, because on previous jobs, there was certain credits that they were trying to get based upon the transit lines at that point. And in subsequent years, they have added like a shuttle route and different things like that. And so just because you're even on the same campus, maybe you're building right next door to another project, you have to continuously kind of vet the possibility of those opportunities for transit.
If you're looking at the project as a campus, for security purposes, they let you use the main entrance as a point, and you can get, if you are not too far away from transportation, you can still get it. Just to bring it up.
Yeah, thank you. All right, another key priority is horizontal mixed uses. And so really this is one, like I said, for master planning, like planners, they should locate compatible uses within the same building, which this one can be difficult in some of the MILCON that we do, just because, when you're talking about mission or funding variables, sometimes it gets a little bit tricky. But that's one that kind of goes into, if we can achieve vertical mixed-use development, we need to try and synchronize that if we can. An example would be if we did vertical mixed-use construction where we'd have maybe a ground floor education or training facility and then some kind of maybe unaccompanied housing above it, or something like that, where we could incorporate vertical mixed uses to maximize the use of the footprint that we're going to take out. All right, and then vertical mixed uses. Vertical mixed uses, like I said, if we can maximize that footprint and have synchronized future projects that can build upon each other, we should always try to do that. Sorry, when I was looking before, I was at horizontal mixed uses. And there are times, going back to this, when it doesn't make sense to have horizontal mixed uses. Like if we really do need to have segregation of appropriate functions, we need to do that. So, for example, we would never put an industrial area in a horizontal mixed-use condition with housing. We wouldn't do that. So we want to try to utilize those compatibilities whenever we can, but we also want to make sure that we don't do that in ways that are unwise or unnecessary. So another one of our priorities are using connected transportation networks. So a connected transportation network of sidewalks and pedestrian pathways and bicycle trails, what it does is it kind of reduces the distance between origins and destinations, and it increases our transportation alternatives. So if we only give people the option of driving a vehicle, we're going to have the maximum number of vehicles. If we give people connected transportation networks where they can use things like bikes and walking, and those options will reduce the maximum number of vehicles that we have in those areas on the roadways using those transportation networks. So whenever we can do that, we want to try to have connected transportation networks and diversity of those networks so that people can maximize all the options. We want to use sustainable landscape elements. And this is using street trees, shrubs, ground cover, and using plants that are suitable for the climate conditions and conserving water resources in the area that we're using. And I would say from another perspective, when it comes to planning, not just using of sustainable landscape elements, but planning to include maintenance of those sustainable landscape elements. I've heard it multiple times, and more times than I care to since I've come to the Corps of Engineers, but we're really good at building new things, and the military is not very good at maintaining new things. And so we would rather tear something down and build it new than we would, maintain it for a long time. And so I think that also applies to our landscape elements, whether it's bioswales or tree plantings or planter boxes or whatever it happens to be that we're using as a sustainable site landscape element. We need to put in place maintenance of those elements as well so that they function the way that we design them for sustainability so that they are sustainable for the long term. And another part of our site development is low impact development and stormwater management. And so for low impact development, we're really trying to use as much as we can on-site natural features to control stormwater runoff quantity and volume. And our low impact development is governed by UFC 3-210-10. And so, one of the ways that we can do that is to add 10% additional site to allow integrated management practices and identify those additional low-impact design costs on the 1391 during project planning, so that we have the funds in place from the very beginning. Another key priority would be multi-story construction. And, like I said, since land is a valuable and scarce commodity, whenever we can do multi-story construction and maximize the square footage we're getting out of that footprint, the better from a land use perspective. And land efficiency improves so much with that multi-story construction. And, like a lot of times people say, oh, well, we don't want to justify, the progressive collapse requirements by going over a certain number of stories. But, if we limit ourselves to 3 stories and less, we are going to eventually find that condition is unsustainable from the land access and land availability standpoint. So if needed, planners and programmers should combine multiple users in the multi-story buildings whenever possible. So, for example, the campus that I'm on right now, one of the things that they really wanted to do was have a joint operations center, because currently the cyber commands of the military entities are all kind of in separate places and have their own facilities, and they work together, but NSA thought, well, if it's possible, why can't we put them all under the same roof? So now instead of they still have their own missions, but they can all be together and collaborate that much more easily, and we can put them all in one location where we can maximize the footprint of that facility. So we have one of our projects on campus does just that, where we combine multiple users into a multi-story facility. And
So, Jason, I was just going to add, I see a comment here is often an issue to progressive collapse is often an issue to overcome with multi-story. I think that's valid. It's something that has to be overcome, but a lot of times I'm not sure that it's an issue that's fully vetted, at early stages, and it may impact your site selection. So, it's not, I've been in the room where the conversation is, going 4 stories would require, or 3 stories even, would require progressive collapse, so therefore we're going to avoid doing that. That's probably not enough investigation, and there's, especially early on in the planning process, you could maybe a little bit more serious thought of the trade-offs between that and putting a taller building on an existing site versus a shorter building on a greenfield or something like that, there might be some real cost-benefit trade-off to be done there.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, that's one of those conversations that needs to happen early on, and if we can do that, we can look at the benefit and cost of that. So the last priority from a master planning perspective would be building orientation and configuration. And I feel like from a site standpoint, this is one where we can really have an influence on this one by the site that we select. And so if we can plan our sites to provide flexibility, it allows us to do a lot with our building orientation and the configuration. There's nothing worse, I think, probably for a site designer than looking at the site and saying, man, this site locks me into one design because of how it, because of either the way it's shaped or whatever it happens to be. It's kind of locking them into having the building be one direction or limiting where they could put their stormwater management features or different things like that. And as an agency, we're dealing with all the requirements of ATFP standoffs and all the other things that already are constraining our site. That if we don't try to plan and pick a site that is going to give us maximum flexibility, then we're going to lose a lot of the possibility of having building orientations that maximize energy performance and all the other kind of aspects of sustainability that we could potentially utilize. That's all I have. I think we're right around when I was hoping to have us finish up. Does anybody have any questions? If you do, you can type them in the chat, and Amy can bring those up.
There's one topic on LCCA, but I'm not entirely sure if now is the right time to talk through that.
That's one. If we could have an email conversation with that person and take that one around.
Yeah.
All right. So just a quick objective review. So we're describing the process for designing and constructing a sustainable site. So we looked at a couple of different things through the USC and through lead documentation, some site characteristics to avoid. We want to avoid using green space or virgin site, any sites with endangered species, any that are disconnected from transit options if possible. And some site design considerations would be, limiting light pollution, making sure that we are attributing or having our stormwater management incorporated into our site, and using low impact design whenever possible, and low impact development. Right. That's all I've got for today. If nobody else has any other questions, say thank you for attending our webinar today, and next one will be next Wednesday at 2 p.m.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hey, sorry to jump in there, but I was going to say, like Andrew, asked the question. I think it would be a really good conversation to have about doing our life cycle cost analysis and the assumptions we make as architects, engineers, about what we're doing and about actually what occurs in the field. So that would be a really good conversation to have.
So session 9, if you look at the agenda that is on life cycle cost analysis, I'll have to look up who's presenting that, but we can definitely make sure that that's that's a topic, and we can also continue to talk about it, by email or chat or something like that. I think we're tracking the concern. It's definitely a topic that's come up during prospect courses before. Now, what to do with that concern is probably a broader conversation. But
yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think that it's like what we're chartered to do from the UFCs and from basically public law, CFRs, all this that we do as designers. When the rubber meets the road and you've got people who actually need to take care of these facilities, that's where we have a separation. And I don't think the DOD has come to grips with that. So we're at odds, right? We're at odds in the sense that the designers, they understand their mission, but the people who are actually maintaining and running these facilities, it's kind of like the maintenance isn't done. It's like things run until they get destroyed and then they get replaced. And those two things are at complete odds with each other. The idea of maintenance, whether you're funding it and whether it's happening, it's like a critical issue in the life cycle cost analysis. So again, I'll look into that, and there's going to be future conversations, but I would suspect there are more than just me. I've been with the Corps of Engineers for a long time now. I've got like many years of experience, but that have witnessed this themselves. So anyway, I think that's a really important subject to dive into.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I totally agree with that.